Okay, great. Well, I can keep admitting people if they jump on, but I think we can go ahead and get started. So hi everyone, and welcome to the GRI Summer Research Showcase. We're so excited that these hardworking students have an opportunity to share the projects they've been hard at work on for the past several months. Before we get started, I would like to quickly let you know about a few upcoming GRI events, since I am the events coordinator. We have our GRI open house coming up on Tuesday, September 20th, and we will be hosting Scott Nelson, author and history professor, for a book talk on his latest release, Oceans of Grain, on Thursday, September 22nd. If you're interested in hearing about other upcoming events and opportunities, please subscribe to the GRI Digest, which I will share the link to in the chat. For students that are presenting during the showcase today, you should all be able to share screens, either if you are an individual presenting or whoever is presenting on your team. If you have any technical issues at any point, you can feel free to send me a message and I will help you troubleshoot that. For those of you who might have noticed, we are recording this session, and so if there is interest, I would be happy to send out the link to that after today. Additionally, at the end of the session, we will be hosting a short Q&A depending on the time remaining. So if anyone has questions throughout the presentations, you can feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat, and our moderator will be collecting questions that will be addressed at the end. And so with that, I am going to stop my share. And I will invite our first presenter with Ignite Global Health Lab. Aaron, if you're on, you can kick us off.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I will share. Great. So my name is Aaron Tavel. I was a research assistant for Julius Odhiambo this summer in Ignite Lab, and my research question was, what are the factors that contribute to Chinese health investment in Africa? So when I approached this problem, I figured the best first step would be to gain a good amount of knowledge on the subject. So I researched first public health in Africa and then the history of health investment to Africa. I found there to be a significant health burden on the African people right now as they struggle with malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, and non-communicable diseases. Traditional donors in North America and Europe that normally have helped combat these diseases are withdrawing their funds and allocating them elsewhere, especially because of the pandemic. So it's important that we start focusing on non-traditional donors, such as China. For this project, I'm taking advantage of AidData's Global Chinese Development Finance dataset, the 2.0 version. And when I first received that dataset, the first thing I wanted to do was visualize the data just to get a better understanding. And you can see to the right that almost 50% of all Chinese health projects in that dataset were found in Africa, which is significant. I then wanted to look within these health projects in Africa, where are they going? And I visualized it once more, and you can see that the majority are going to Western Africa, and there are not nearly as many in Northern Africa. Around now is when we faced the first kind of problem in our project. The data set we were using was organized by project level data. It was geocoded. And we were trying to find data that we could align with coordinates, but we were having a lot of trouble doing that. So we ended up switching gears and we shifted to looking to national level data that describes something that the whole country is facing. So the unit of analysis in our study is going to be a country in Africa and a year, and the period of study is going to be 2000 to 2019. So when I decided to start actually looking for factors that influence where China is investing health, the data that was the most available and most thorough was health-related data, because there were so many different sources. I was able to collect data on the incidences of malaria and tuberculosis, the prevalence of HIV, and the under 5 mortality rate in each country and just about each year. I then wanted to look at factors that weren't health related, but were more focused on the natural environment of each state. And I decided that it would be important that we look at whether a country was landlocked or not, the natural resources that a country is extracting, and then whether China prioritizes a region of Africa over another. So we're using the African Union's region classification for that. And then finally, I'm a government major. I thought we should look at socioeconomic covariates. So we pulled data on the unemployment rate for each country. It's a good measure for the economy. We also pulled data on how much a state is spending on health, and we did that by the percentage of their GDP that's being spent on domestic health. And finally, I wanted to look at the type of government that each state was. So we used a polity score, and the polity score is how democratic or autocratic a state is. After collecting many of the covariates, we thought that distributing them into covariates, into indicators would be very helpful for A, people understanding our project as they read it, and B, as we expand our project, if we can classify new covariates into one of these 3 indicators, it will just be a lot more helpful. So we established an epidemiological, a geographic, and a socioeconomic indicator. And the final step before actually modeling and figuring out the factors are relevant was to create a conceptual framework just to visualize what was going on. You'll see here that we have our covariates being classified into indicators, and from there we arrive at our dependent variable, which is whether China invested at least one health project in a country during a certain year. Again, another problem we faced here was we were trying to figure out what we should actually make our dependent variable, because some states were receiving well over 5 projects in a year, some were receiving 1. So we were thinking maybe we should look at the number of projects, but we ended up deciding whether China will invest, yes or no. And now we get to the results. So for those who aren't familiar with a logistic model is one that uses a data set to calculate the odds of a binary outcome. In our case, it would be whether or not China is investing in a country in a certain year. The things you have to note about this table are the difference between unadjusted and adjusted odds ratio. The unadjusted means that we're evaluating each variable independent of one another. And the adjusted odds ratio is we're looking at all of the variables together to determine what has an impact on Chinese investment. You also should note that the reference point, it's REF, means that the odds are calculated in relative to that reference point. For example, you'll see under health expenditure that the unadjusted odds ratio is 1.41 for 5 to 10%. That means that since it's greater than 1, there is an increased odds of China investing in that country in a year compared to if the country had a GDP, they were spending below 5% of their GDP on health. Other interesting things from this table, you'll see unemployment and mineral exports are statistically significant. And another interesting result was for tuberculosis incidence in our adjusted odds ratio. You'll see that the odds actually decrease of Chinese investment when the incidence increases compared to if it was below 100. And again, you can determine that if the odds ratio is less than 1. The next steps from here is we'd like to get this on paper, and we're working on writing it all out right now. And from there, we'd like to revisit the project level data and try to find local covariates. Thank you.
Okay, Julia, take us away.
Alrighty. Okay, I'm gonna assume you're all able to see my screen. So my name is Julia. I'm representing TRIP today. So I'm gonna start off with a brief overview of what TRIP is and then talk about the scope of our current project as well as where we're at now and where we're headed in the fall. So if anyone's unfamiliar, TRIP stands for Teaching, Research, and International Policy. It's trying to examine the divide or lack thereof between the study of international relations and the application of international relations. So that's considering how academia interacts with international policy. All right, so how we kind of do that is largely through surveys, which is what we're doing right now. So this survey that we're sending out in 2022 is covering the years 2017 to 2020, and we're sending out 3 different surveys, but they all have a very similar focus, and we're using those results to compare against one another. So we have 3 different populations that we're surveying and have different surveys responding to those populations. So the first is focusing on policymakers. We have about 5,000 individuals that we're reaching out to from various agencies in the government that write policy. So that includes a trade sample, a development sample, and a security sample. So we have all sorts of different agencies represented within that population. And then we have our faculty survey. So that's being sent out to about 6,000 different faculty members of universities throughout the country. And so that is including all sorts of university faculty who focus on political science and international relations, but within that they have a range of specialties. So that's things like human rights, human security, global health, all those different kind of subsects. So we have a lot of different specialties represented in our faculty population. And then we have our think tank population that we're sending out a think tank survey to, and that'll be about 6,000 people. And that's all US-based think tanks that are focused on international relations and foreign policy. And we are specifically not reaching out to think tanks affiliated with universities so that there's no overlap with our faculty sample within that. And then at the bottom here, I have some other universities and the research labs that we are collaborating with. So that's Notre Dame, Duke, the Political Violence Lab out of UC Merced, and then Virginia Tech. So we're working with those universities as well on this project to send out the surveys. So as I said, there are 3 different surveys, but they all have very similar focuses. And so the focus can be kind of understood in 5 different categories. So the first thing that we're asking about is the work that these individuals are completing. And so we ask them about if they're, working in academia, we ask what kind of classes they're teaching and what level they're teaching at, things like that. And then we're able to kind of compare those results against each other year by year to see how the field is shifting as a whole. So I have this graph to the right. That's just one example of how we are comparing data from previous years that we sent out these surveys. And so we're asking people about the study of international relations and seeing in this example how they've interacted with different paradigms throughout the years. And so we're able to see change over time within the field and get kind of a broad scope of what the field of international relations looks like and where it's headed. And then we also complete rankings for different university programs. And so that is working in collaboration with Foreign Policy Magazine. We work together to create different rankings for university programs. So that includes undergraduate programs, master's degree programs, and PhD programs, all focused on political science and international relations. And then the third category is bridging the gap. So that's explicitly asking them how they're interacting with those different sectors. So if someone is a policymaker, we'll ask them about how they interact with academia, and not just if they interact, but what specific mediums they're interacting with. So maybe that could be journal articles, or if they're engaging in research, asking those kind of questions just to see how they're kind of working across the field and what those interactions look like in practice. And then the fourth category, which I'll get to more so on the next slide, is about foreign policy. So that's asking about their opinions and kind of seeing where people stand, and then what those results look like in comparison with the opinions that they have with interacting with those kind of different sectors. And then the fifth question is we ask demographics questions to get a scope of what our population sample looks like. So as I said, that foreign policy category that we focus on in our surveys, we have 3 different kind of approaches here. So the first one is just explicit categorizing. So we'll ask them questions about their party affiliations and their beliefs on specific international issues that are facing the world right now. And it's getting a sense as to how they see their own beliefs and how they see that interacting with their work. And then as well, we ask them about their foreign policy opinions through presenting them with hypothetical situations. So we'll present them with these situations, test hypotheses on the respondents to these surveys. And for these hypotheticals, that was also a collaborative effort in a different capacity, in that we released a call for proposals for students, postdoctoral fellows, university faculty, and these are people all across the world who are able to submit a proposal and have that be considered to be sent out on the survey. And we are emphasizing people from underrepresented backgrounds in the selection for those proposals, which have been selected to be applied as hypothetical situations on these surveys. And then the third aspect that we're measuring here is confidence in responses. So we'll ask them questions like, what is the likelihood of X event occurring? And then the next question will be, what is your confidence in the previous answer? It could be not super high or super high. And then we kind of gauge who is responding with the extremes in confidence, high or low. We compare that with demographics like gender. We compare that with their background and how they're engaging with these kind of different levels of academia and whatnot. So that's our scope for these surveys. And then to update you guys on where we stand right now. So summer, our focus has been a lot of contact collection, getting those surveys compiled, having those questions written, reviewing those calls, the proposal call, and then we are going to be sending that out shortly as we wrap up contact collection for all those different agencies and think tanks and faculty. And then moving forward to the fall, we're going to be sending out those surveys and then analyzing the results internally and working towards creating a public-facing piece with that information. So thank you for your time.
Great job, Julia. Okay, I think next we have Abby.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby, and this summer I traveled to Tbilisi in the Republic of Georgia as a GRI summer fellow with 4 other undergraduate researchers. And there we were investigating U.S.-Georgian relations for a project that Professor Daniel Maleniak in the government department is currently working on. So our goal was to interview Georgian veterans that served in Iraq and Afghanistan to gauge their attitudes towards serving abroad, and then more generally, their attitudes towards the West. While in Georgia, our team conducted over 30 interviews, including former Georgian government officials, Georgian veterans, and Georgian academics. And through these interviews, we asked questions about their service abroad, NATO and EU integration, and Georgian domestic politics. So while we did all of this, our research has continued to expand and included some of the following questions as well. So one of them is what motivated Georgians to serve in Afghanistan and Iraq? And some of these responses include money, experience, patriotism, and prospective NATO membership. Another point that came up in our interviews that we included in our research was why are Western educated Georgians actually leaving the government and military positions? And answers include economic opportunities, political risk in staying, and disillusionment. And finally, NATO and EU integration was a topic that was often discussed organically within our interviews, as it's something that the Georgians are striving towards in the next 5 or 10 years. And it ended up developing into a question that was what questions currently exist that prevent Georgia from integrating into the EU and NATO. And one of the top responses is that Georgia needs judiciary reform within the nation, as well as the fact that there is current Russian aggression in the region, as well as current Russian aggression in Georgia, as 20% of the country is currently occupied by Russia. So while our research continued to expand, and it's, I'm sure, going to as we keep conducting these interviews, our primary focus is still on U.S.-Georgian military relations. And some of the key preliminary takeaways include the willingness of Georgia to prove that they are an asset to the U.S. by serving in combat situations such as Iraq and Afghanistan, and their eagerness to serve alongside U.S. military in combat because of the experience that they gain serving with U.S. military officials. So thank you very much for your time, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Great, thank you, Abby. Next, I believe we have our pair of fellows, Ian and Saladin.
Hello.
Dean, you want to go ahead and share it?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. All right, well, good afternoon. I'm Ian. I'm one of 2 fellows with Professor Shargawal, and then this is Dean, my stunning coworker. We spent the last month in Tunisia, and similarly to the Georgian experience, we were conducting interviews, trying to get a sense of how people felt about the ongoing political crisis, especially political opposition figures. There's been a legislative coup d'etat for the last year, and it came to a referendum at the end of July. So we landed there at the end of June and kind of worked our way up to that, kind of check out the political landscape. Go ahead.
Yeah, so our goals when we landed there as fellows were to research Tunisians' attitudes to Kais Saied. Kais Saied is the elected president that Ian was sort of alluding to. He'd been ruling the country by decree since July 25th, 2021, so about a year. We are going to primarily do this through not only just communicating, talking with local Tunisians, but also a survey, which we were unable to conduct as of right now, but we will conduct in the future, and Ian will talk about that later. We also conducted interviews with major opposition parties about Said's coup, the new constitution and the referendum, and their plan for Tunisia. We wanted to assess the opposition strategies, namely boycott or vote no on the upcoming referendum. And we also wanted to write some pieces about Said's constitution and Said's coup. So here we have two screenshots of our pieces. One was in Brookings and one was in the Monkey Cage with Washington Post. You can thank Dr. Rawal for that. And we helped transcribe many of the interviews and helped review them. So the ongoings of last year, just for a little background, Kais Saied, he was a former constitutional law professor and political outsider. He was democratically elected the president of Tunisia in 2019 with 73% of the vote. He was extraordinarily popular. He was nicknamed RoboCop, and he actually was very well loved by many of the citizenry. At the time, there was, I guess, some discontent within the population. So July 25th, after protests against Ennahda and COVID-19 lockdowns, the country was sort of in this disarray. Said dismissed the government, froze parliament, arrested multiple MPs and civil society leaders, and began ruling by decree. While we were in the country, June 30th, he published a new draft constitution. Sorry, let me just, how do you put my do not disturb on? Okay, he published a new draft constitution. Oh shit, oh sorry, pardon my language, which would give him unchecked powers and put in place this new democratic system, quote unquote. So on July 25th, the constitutional referendum occurs on a new draft constitution. And with around 30% turnout, 90% of those who voted approved the new constitution, and the referendum was boycotted. Oh my God, what is happening? Sorry. The referendum was boycotted by the major opposition groups, and this new constitution solidified Kais Saied's one-man rule and put an end to the only democracy to emerge after the Arab Spring.
It's like Siri is joining the presentation.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
I don't know how to get rid of Siri.
No need to apologize.
There's an X in the top. Yeah.
There you go.
Perfect. Next slide, please.
Oh God. There you go.
But there we go. Okay, perfect. So what makes this situation scarier than it already is, and part of why we went there, was to study democratic backsliding specifically. The new constitution, though many people that showed up and voted were very vocal, taking to the street after it passed in essentially a sham referendum, there were a lot of problematic things put in the new constitution, such as it removed in Article 88, which allowed Parliament to impeach the president. So now he's operating with little checks and balances. The Prime Minister, the Constitutional Court are all weakened. They can no longer stop him from assuming exceptional executive powers, which is the way that he initiated the coup d'etat last year, invoking a, just like broadly interpreting the Constitution to say everything is in disarray. I am allowed to just rule unilaterally, essentially. In the absence of a constitutional court, the president was empowered to just liberally interpret that document. And then another thing that kind of surprised us when the new document came out, there's a new article, Article 5 in the new constitution says that Tunisia is part of the Islamic Ummah and instructs the state to achieve the pure objectives of Islam, or the objectives of pure Islam. Everybody that we spoke to in Tunisia said, what are the objectives of pure Islam? And it created a lot of discourse and a lot of worry that Tunisia is on its way to becoming a theocracy like Iran. There's no consensus on what pure Islam actually is. And if the constitution is going to be interpreted as broadly as it was, then this is a pathway to essentially introducing Sharia law, depending on what Kais Saied does. Many people described him as like a megalomaniac and a self-appointed savior figure. So I don't know, I can't speak on Tunisia, but I personally am worried to see what happens coming out of this. Compare that to 2014, where all the constitution said was that Islam was the religion of the Tunisian state. So it's a lot more aggressive as far as the religious aspect, but it could just be a populist distraction.
So a major consideration of us when we got to the country was to meet with the opposition and discuss their strategies, namely, as I mentioned, boycott or participate in the upcoming referendum. So we conducted interviews with nearly all of the major political parties in opposition to Saeed. Saeed, as I mentioned, is an independent and had no political party or legitimate party. So he was sort of, it was sort of Saeed against the entire establishment. And we found that most of the parties boycotted on a number of lines. Namely, they viewed the referendum and Saeed's actions as unconstitutional and illegitimate. That was mentioned by Najib Shebi, as you can see in the top right photo, who was the leader of the National Salvation Front. They also expected the referendum results to be falsified. This was mentioned by Samira Shawishi, who's in the bottom left. She had even said that the number and the percentage points of the referendum were going to be mentioned before, or were already decided before the referendum was to take place. So they aimed to delegitimize the entire process. They viewed it as unconstitutional, they viewed it illegitimate, and they viewed participating in it as a way to legitimize the process itself. Another strategy that the opposition was discussing was they viewed boycotting as a strategy to give the impression of a larger support base. So as I mentioned, there was 30% turnout, and this is extremely low. But even before the referendum, there was an expectation of even lower turnout. This is namely to do with opposition, apathetic voters, the opposition's decision to boycott. To some extent, by boycotting, they wanted to give the impression that they were with those apathetic voters, that the apathetic voters were actually boycotting to some extent. So our articles and many of our interviews and our discussions with the Tunisian people were actually in an effort to sort of kind of sway to some extent the idea that boycotting might not be the best way to go about it, and voting no over boycotting could actually make an impact, because now as we see in Tunisia, the constitution is now in place, and Saeed is looking down the line of I guess an autocratic leadership strategy. So I think.
And I'll talk a little bit about the survey kind of upcoming, and then we have a little, or do you want to do the timeline first, Dean? What do you think?
No, I don't know where this survey is.
Well, if it's not a slide, it's not a problem.
Okay.
We have an upcoming survey that will be nationally representative. There's a firm that Professor Kowal is working with in Tunisia, and they'll go around and knock on doors and interview people. And we hope to get a sense of one of the problems studying this delicate context is that in addition to you have a president that has the military support, tensions are already kind of high. There's a lot of mis and disinformation about like just the situation on the ground. There are a lot of figures varying about how many people actually showed up to vote. I've heard anywhere between 23 to 30%. Credibility in government institutions has been strategically dismantled as part of Kais Said's strategy. So by going around and talking to people, administering a survey in Arabic, we hope to not only get an impression of the demographics that are supporting, but also how many people actually voted. And then also interesting information about, like, do you support China? A little bit more like geopolitical insight from this, seeing what the United States can do as far as like packaging itself to help this context, because many people that we interviewed said that the West could be doing more, like not hard power, just soft power, but the West could be doing more. Like if Department of State had come out and said, you know, called a spade, like this is a coup d'etat. Like some people believe that normative pressure could have helped earlier, before we got to this point. So kind of using the survey as an instrument to disentangle all of these conflicting narratives, all these conflicting sources of information, and then hopefully we'll analyze it and write more pieces about it. So we're excited to do that.
Yeah, sorry about the technological issues there, guys. But yeah, that's all we have for you guys today.
Okay, great. And great job, rolling with the punches, gentlemen. Next, we have the first tough presentation. So that is Mariana and Anne.
Okay, let me just share my screen.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm not sure we can top series intervention during the last presentation, but I'm Mariana and I will be presenting with Annie, and we're both rising sophomores. I'm majoring in international relations and Chinese studies, and Annie is majoring in international relations. We are from the Tough China team, otherwise known as the China Development Finance Program within A-Data, and we're here to share a little bit about what our team has been up to this summer. We're currently the largest team at GRI and participate in tracking and tracing development financing from China to the rest of the world.
So on the TOUGH team, we use the TOUGH methodology to explore and trace international aid financing from China, which does not otherwise report where its money is going. While the United States and other countries that are part of the Development Assistance Committee report their development publicly and through the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, China does not do so. The TOUGH team steps in and synthesizes open source information to find financing at the project level and tracks it as it moves from stages of commitment to actual disbursement and project completion. The long-term analysis and tracking of our projects allows us to comprehend the environmental, humanitarian, and developmental impacts behind the financing.
While we track financing from explicitly or unspecified Chinese government sources, TOUGH also finds information about and captures aid that comes from state-owned institutions, including banks, and even state-owned enterprises. Some of these include, yet aren't limited to, Sinohydro, the Chinese Development Bank, the Bank of China, and the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. When classifying projects, we code them as ODA-like or OOF-like. ODA-like flows are more concessional, and they typically have a development intent. Some examples include grants, technical assistance, debt relief, concessional loans, and military aid with development intent. OOF-like flows normally hold a commercial representational intent and tend to be non-concessional. Some examples of these include non-concessional loans, export credits, and Confucius Institutes.
Our publicly available dataset tracks 18 years of official financing to 165 countries in every major world region. The dataset contains more than 13,000 projects with over a combined $800 billion of committed financing. It captures projects supported by 334 different official sector institutions in China, including central government agencies. This summer, the China team has been finalizing our 2019 dataset and beginning work on our 2020 data collection. So to do this, we use, again, the TOUGH methodology, which is both transparent and very replicable. Essentially, what our team does is we scrape the internet with a heavy emphasis on official donor and recipient government sources, such that we are able to create project-level data, which enables macro-level analysis of Chinese development financing around the world. So this graphic on the screen was taken from an article in the William and Mary magazine featuring the Chinese official finance team's work.
Members of the TOUGH team begin data collection by poring over official sources from China, recipient countries, and other non-state actors. Succeeding data collection, coders perform targeted searches, filling in any informational gaps in our projects, making sure they are accurate and ready for publication. Finally, senior members of the team perform quality assurance on all projects in the dataset. We present the data we collect through reports, interactive dashboards, and maps. The TOUGH team creates projects as diverse as loans, from major infrastructure projects to basic humanitarian aid, as long as it comes from an official source. If you're wondering what the projects we work on look like, this past spring, I worked as a stage 1 coder on the 2019 dataset. I specifically worked on coding projects from Colombia, Morocco, Yemen, and Romania, among others. Similarly to our data from previous years, most projects include donations, whether that be for emergency aid, books, or supplies, to entities, schools, hospitals, or organizations within countries. Various loans aim to develop infrastructure and technology as more countries join the Belt and Road Initiative. Within countries where China has an increasing economic footprint, they also have funded or given grants to entities such as the national publishing houses to construct bookstores within countries in order to spread Chinese language and culture. I saw this within a specific project when working on Morocco, where the Zetoile bookstore was constructed upon a grant instituted by an unspecified Chinese government sector. Other projects I encountered last spring included a revolving credit fund to Global Worth Real Estate from the Bank of China, worth 200 million euros, and a donation of solar panels to Colombia. Throughout the summer, we have been working on and concluding the 2019 dataset.
Also this summer, we began our 2020 data collection, which includes data from East Asia Pacific countries, Latin American countries, African countries, and the Caribbean. Our data collection from 2020 mostly includes COVID donations from China to recipient countries. These donations typically consist of medical supplies, such as the 2020 project found on this slide, where the Chinese embassy in Malaysia donated medical face masks to the Sarawak Immigration Department and the Malaysian Police Department. This summer, I've had the opportunity to work on the 2020 dataset for Malaysia, Uruguay, Ecuador, and Botswana as a stage 1 coder. So on this slide, we've included events and financing that are not collected in the TUF dataset. Events hosted by embassies and donations by private business people are not considered official projects.
Throughout my data collection within stage 1, I encountered instances including certain foreign direct investments and consortiums or bids that we wouldn't count within our data set. However, being able to read and observe these other financial flows gives us an insight into the differences among official and non-official Chinese financing. Towards the end of the 2019 data collection, I also looked at countries that don't hold diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China, and we noted a significant lack of projects within these countries in our 2019 data set.
The TUF dataset has been discussed in over 400 TV, radio, print, and online stories, including a lead story on BBC Global coverage, reaching an estimated 270 million people and translated into 38 languages. The AData website has had over 100,000 views, including web traffic from India, Japan, Australia, China, and more. Over the past 3 weeks in particular, we've seen a flurry of elite media coverage of AData and William & Mary's China research, including 2 front-page Wall Street Journal stories, 4 Financial Times stories, and a New York Times piece.
So to conclude, Annie and I wanted to share some of the questions we have from the trends we've noticed in our data set and what we've learned throughout our time in TUF. On my part, overall, I believe that my time with TUF has been incredibly valuable as it has brought me a different political and economic perspective in viewing Chinese relations with various countries. I've always believed that research is a powerful outlet to shed light on a passion, feeling, or doubt, and as someone who was born and grew up in Colombia, I've noted a growing Chinese influence within my country and believe that specifically analyzing China's flows and growing influence within Colombia has brought me to answer some questions of my own while continuing to ask many questions. Especially with the recent election of Gustavo Petro and the left's entrance within Colombia starting August 7th, I'm intrigued to see how China's diplomatic influence will impact its economic footprint across Latin American countries, and how Colombia's upcoming relation with China will affect relations with the United States as its main ally and with many multilaterals such as the Inter-American Development Bank. I also recently was able to work on the HIC, the High Income Country Pilot, through which I used GIS and mapping skills to code projects from a geospatial lens, which I haven't been able to do before. So I've definitely gained many valuable skills from my time at AData.
As a 2020 Stage 1 coder and an IR major, it's been especially interesting for me to see firsthand how China's financing goals shifted due to the COVID-19 pandemic. China's medical donations and developmental aid became a way for China to establish and maintain diplomatic ties to other countries amidst the global health crisis. Working on the TUF team has been a unique opportunity for me to see concepts I typically learn in the classroom play out in real-life circumstances. For me, one of the most interesting parts of scraping donor and recipient sources has been developing a true understanding of the reciprocity of international diplomacy and how that intersected with the spread of COVID. Working on the TUF team has also given Mariana and I incredible opportunities outside of our regular work. Earlier this summer, we had the opportunity to volunteer at the Global China Conference hosted by the GRI. Having the ability to speak to policymakers, foreign policy experts, and meet other AData researchers was an invaluable experience. So to conclude, thank you all for listening. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you both. Okay, next we have Taylor, also with TUF.
All right, I'm sharing my screen now. All right, so my name is Tara Legal. I'm a rising junior and a computer and data science major. And this summer, I was a software development assistant on the TUF team working on the robot classifier. So a quick overview of the purpose of the TUF robot and our goals for this summer. The TUF robot classifier is used in the first step of ADA's Chinese Development Finance Program's data collection. It heavily reduces the manual workload of identifying relevant Chinese government finance projects from a pool of thousands of articles. our goals for this summer were first to improve the top robot classifier metrics, and secondly, to integrate duplicate article detection and removal in the classifier workflow. Because we're getting so many articles from different sources, there is a chance that duplicates show up in the training set or in the query results. So the first task to improve the statistics was to identify potentially problematic data with an all but N concept. Because there were so many files with over 24,000 files in our training set, it was impossible to go through each one and verify that they were in the correct place overall. The solution to this was an all but N, where N was 20, model/file analysis. What this means is that we went through all the files and separated 20 at a time. We trained the model on everything except those 20 files, meaning we taught it like what a yes file looks like and what a no file looks like, and then evaluated the model on those 20 that we separated and saw what class that they were the model determined them as and how confident the model was in those predictions. So in the graph here, the red represents the number of yes files that were misclassified as no documents, and the blue, the number of no files that were misclassified as yes documents. And at the bottom on the x-axis is the probability, the confidence that the model had in making those incorrect predictions. What we're really looking for in this step is the misclassified targets in the 80 to 100% confidence range. This is because these are considered high value targets where the model was super confident in a very wrong decision. And it was really important for us to kind of figure out why it was making those decisions. So the next subtask we did was deduping our own training set data. So again, 24,000 files, it would have been impossible to do this manually. So within our folders, the yes training data and the no training data, this basically means we're looking within these sets and saying, okay, in the yes folder, are there any files that are identical to other files in the yes set? So within the yes training data, we found that 19% of the data were duplicates of other articles. And for the no training data, 24.3% were duplicates of other articles within the set. So after some manual verification, we were able to remove these and get a much cleaner data set. So after this initial cleaning experiment, we moved to seeing if there were any between folder duplicates, basically meaning, are there any yes file examples that are the same as the within the no category? And so there was a substantially lower number of duplicates here with only roughly 4%, but these duplicates required a higher level of manual inspection than the interfolder duplicates, because unlike the within folder duplicates, we couldn't just toss them out. We had to go through them individually and see where they truly belonged. And so the third task we did to improve the statistics of the model was to tackle the nature of the imbalanced training set with natural language processing data augmentation. So when we initially got the training set, the ratio of no to yes files was extremely skewed in favor of the no files, and there were so many more of them. And this imbalanced nature of the data set negatively affected the model's scores. So the solution for this is using a natural language processing data augmentation method, add a number of new articles, which were just yes files with some percentage of words replaced as synonyms. Because we had a big lack of yes data, by faking this new yes data, we're able to sort of resolve this imbalanced nature of the data set. So I've showed the results of this experiment on the screen. Overall, the number of misclassified documents dropped steeply, especially in that high target range, which we were really excited to see, because that means the model isn't making those very confident errors the same way it was before. And additionally, the model stats really increased with this augmentation, with the F1 score up between 8 or 9 points. And the other statistics we were seeing as well increased similarly with 3 to 5 point increases. And so the final task for the summer, duplication removal, it was actually pretty straightforward to integrate duplicate detection and removal into the overall research process after our work with the training set this summer. So this was really positive because not only does it reduce the manual work needed by researchers to go through all this training data and seeing if anything is a duplicate, it also reduces the chance for anything to slip through into the final set and potentially make it its way into the final research set. And so that's all for me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Taylor. Great job. Next up, we have Justin.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Justin. So today I'll be talking about my general research experience with Professor Baldomero this past winter, spring, and summer, and with the projects I've been mainly working on this summer. So some background information, I'm an economics major from Woodbridge, Virginia. I'm doing research because I'm looking to either go to grad school after I graduate or just be able to work in a research-based job. And I started working with Professor Baldomero Quintana during a winter break after fall semester of 2021. So this summer, the two main projects that I've been working on are new residential investments in gentrification and structural transformation in racial wage gaps. So while doing this type of research, I've also been taking classes to help me further on my research skills. So I've been taking classes such as advanced macroeconomics, intro to computational problem solving, cross-sectional econometrics, and higher level math courses to make this research process go by a little easier. So the first project that I will be talking about is new residential investments and gentrification. So this project, it's the one I spent the most time with. This project is being worked on to be submitted to a peer-reviewed journal, and the principal investigators are Divya Singh, who works at Amazon, and Professor Baldomero Quintana. So our objective for this project is to provide evidence that the construction of new building leads to gentrification. So this is a build-off of Divya's previous work. So our current findings right now with this project are as following. More housing leads to lower rental prices across American cities, but new residential investments increases rental prices in New York City neighborhoods. So it shows that when there's new development, it actually increases rental prices in New York, and it leads to more gentrification. These new buildings also reduce the education enrollment in neighborhoods across public schools, since there's more displacement of working class parents since they can't afford that rent anymore. So what have my contributions been to this project? My contributions were to create a georeference data set of school enrollments for all New York City public schools. So this project was very detail oriented, since it used a lot of administrative data from the Department of Education and from the New York City County Board of Education. And it requires so much attention because the administrative data that I've been using has so many issues. It requires a lot of cleaning up to be usable, and it's inconsistent across years. So to make sure that we have everything that we needed, I had to pay attention for the racial data, to make sure the racial data was there, to make sure that the coordinates and other geospatial indicators were all there. And this project took up quite a lot of time. I've been working on it since the beginning of spring, and I'm still currently working on it. My main contributions have been to build this georeference data set, but I've also been helping out with running regressions with rental data in New York City. And this project has been very frustrating, to say the least, at some part, but it's something that I've been very interested in, and I've been very glad to be able to be a part of this project. The next project that I contributed to mainly as well is structural transformation in the racial wage gap. So this project, again, is another one that's being submitted to be peer reviewed. The principal investigators for this project, though, are Bartholomew Bonadillo, Vanessa Alvarez, and Professor Baldomero Quintana. And this project is the objective of it is to provide evidence that the growth of service sectors has benefited minority workers in the United States by reducing their racial wage gap with respect to white workers. So I say that this is a project I've contributed to. That's not very true, because most of it has been, since I just started working on this project about 3 weeks ago, most of my time has been being trained by the previous RA. Just as my previous project, this one is also very detail oriented, and it's even more intensive in code and data. This uses a ton of data from the Census and Bureau of Economic Analysis, and data from ACS as well. So most of my time, like I said, has been being trained up to be able to continue on with this project since the previous RA has graduated, and I'm being put on to lead this project. It requires a ton of intricacies. The amount of files and data I have is just through the roof. So I have to be able to make sure I can keep track of all the previous files and be knowledgeable in all the coding that comes with cleaning the data, being able to run the regressions, being able to run the IV regressions, and overall being able to just be comfortable enough to know this project like the back of my hand. So far, there isn't much I can say about it since I'm just starting off, but the project has been in the works for years. There's been a ton of setbacks, and we're hoping now that since most of them have been cleared up at this point, that I can continue on from the previous RA's work and be able to smoothly move on continuing this project. So my overall experience working with Professor Baldomero as a research assistant has taught me a lot. It's taught me that research needs a lot of detail and it requires a ton of patience. Like I said before, the previous two projects I've had so many setbacks with either data sets being missing or not existing, there not being it being messy and stuff like that. So it's taught me a lot that research isn't as smooth sailing as some people make it out to be. But I've also gained a lot of knowledge about the process of doing research, of working with data, of doing literature reviews and so on that I wouldn't have learned in class. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity. I've been able to put into practice my classroom knowledge of research. So I know a lot of us think that when we're taking classes, we say, oh, when are we ever going to use this? So being able to actually use my econometrics class that I've taken and being able to use my advanced macroeconomics theories and stuff like that to be able to put into this research has been very helpful to me, because I like to think of myself as somebody who uses the data to understand the theory, and actually being able to see how the theory comes from these data has been something that I've thoroughly enjoyed. It's helped me learn a lot of new software. Before, previously, Stata was the only one I've used. So in doing these projects, these are the two projects that I wanted to briefly mention right now, but there's been other projects that I've worked on, and being able to learn new software to go along with those are MATLAB, LaTeX. I'm going to be taking classes with Python soon, so I can also be using that. It's been very beneficial. I feel like it's going to be something that's going to help me out a lot in the future. My overall skills have improved in a general sense beyond just economics and being able to work in research. I've learned a lot more on how to be a lot more organized, because like I said, some of the other projects, it takes up like 5 gigabytes of data. So being able to be organized with all my files, all my codes, and so on has been very helpful in my personal life, since I think I'm not that organized of a person. It's taught me how to be efficient with my time, with balancing out my classwork and my work, because like I said, some of these projects I've been working on since spring, so I've had to balance that out, and overall coding skills as well have improved. So my research experience with Professor Baldomero and all these projects that I've worked on, I'm really grateful for, and it's been a helpful experience overall.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Lauren.
Hi, everyone. This summer, I have been working on a project based on the question, does the quality of infrastructure matter for local structural transformation? The evidence from internet in the US. I've been working with Professor Baldomero Quintana and Professor Acosta from EAFIT in Colombia. The research team is myself. I'm a rising senior in econ and IR, Mia Tyndall, who's a rising sophomore, and Eli Rothleader, who just graduated as an economics major. The objective of this paper is what is the impact of the quality of telecommunications infrastructure on the local economic structure of US counties. The paper will be sent to a peer-reviewed journal, and a draft will be shared with economists at the Department of Treasury. We have been using historical maps, modern maps, telecom data, and census data, and the method that we are using is instrumental variable regression. This is the economic model that we have been using with the service outcomes for payroll or number of workers in a service sector, and internet quality based on internet speed per county for 2018 data. And then we are also using historical algorithmization controls. The instrumental variables are spatial network location of precursor of internet based on ARPANET data, which was created due to Department of Defense needs. This is one of the historical maps that we used. We got it from looking at archives of internet creation. All of the dots are nodes where there was original internet access, and then the lines are where the internet was able to communicate with the different nodes. This was one of the most time-consuming parts of our research because there was no key for what the individual nodes acronyms meant. Some of them could be determined based on knowing that a lot of the nodes came from colleges or government institutions. So some of them were straightforward, but a lot of them weren't. And we ended up having to contact a lot of the colleges that were part of the original internet structure to see if they had any information in their archives on what the different acronyms meant. But we were able to get all of them, and this is what makes up the basis of our data. This is some of the results for impacts of higher quality of internet provisions on employment. One of the interesting things that we found from this is that within finance and insurance, there is heterogeneity. Although finance and insurance itself has a negative impact, there is a positive impact in activities related to electronic finance, which is a subsector of that industry sector. But there's a negative impact in activities related to local banks. I have learned a lot through this project. I really expanded my knowledge of software and coding as the main coder for this project using Stata. And I've really gotten to understand a lot more regressions and interpreting results, and also having to present this information in a way that people can easily determine what the results of the regressions are based on hundreds of regressions at a time. I've also had a lot of time finding data sets and determining the quality of this data from government organizations, and finding missing data and how that is going to affect the regressions that we are running. Also, this is extremely detailed with, like I said, there's hundreds of regressions and many data sets that we're working with. So keeping very detailed notes on the codes that I'm running, and also starting the writing process of data documentation for our upcoming paper. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lauren. Next up, we have IJL with Berlin and Alexandra.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Alexandra. Can you hear me? Okay, cool. It is 4:30 a.m. in Mongolia right now, but I thought it was important to be here to present our paper, Producing Truth, Public Memory Projects in Post-Violence Societies. As one of our IJL fellows said a couple years ago, transitional justice wakes me up in the morning, so I gotta walk the walk. Yeah, and we're gonna be presenting this paper at APSA in September. Slide. All right, so we actually have been working on this paper for over a year now, and we presented our initial theory this time last year at the showcase. Well, Belinda did, thanks, Belinda. But we decided to study memorialization because it's an integral part of transitional justice, which is our field of research. And we found by looking in the literature that memorialization hadn't really been studied at a granular level, nor had many scholars been able to look at memorialization proposals. They had kind of been looking at final projects. And so we study truth commissions, which are quasi-judicial bodies that take a look at past violence in a society, and they make a set of recommendations going forward. And so we noticed that truth commissions make a lot of recommendations about memorialization, about how society should remember their past. And we found that these are amazing blueprints actually to look at projects before they're completed. And then we can track them through implementation, which is coding that we had been doing for previous projects. Slide. So we theorize memorialization in its component parts. And those are intent, subject, medium, and location. And we have subcategories for each of them. And basically we're saying for a project, you can look at each of these sections, and then you can look at, is a different location going to affect implementation, so on for all the other categories. And so we have the varieties of truth commissions database, which we've been using for other projects, and that's created by Dr. Zhrabko, who is our fearless leader. And so we took about 200 memorialization recommendations across 28 countries from 1970 to 2018. And we created our own variables. We had implementation coding. We finished that up for all of these recommendations related to memorialization. And then we created our own variables related to these component parts. So in the next slide, I can show you what our codebook looks like, or part of it at least. So this is an example for medium. We basically ask, does this proposal ask for a monument, event, museum, etc.? And with data like this, along with our implementation coding, we can ask questions like, is a monument more likely to be implemented than a museum, or do truth commissions propose certain types of mediums more than others? And Belinda is going to talk more about what we found.
Yeah, so after that, we actually analyzed the data to figure out if the numbers aligned with our hypotheses. So we started off with the basics by looking at the descriptive data, which was actually super enlightening. So as you can see, one category made up the majority within subject and medium, while there was a three-way split in location. So we tried to find potential reasons for these results. So for example, monuments were by far the most recommended medium of memory, which contradicts our previous idea that monuments are more politically contested than museums. And so one theory for this disconnect may be that monuments are usually simpler to put in place than museums, which are more expensive and complicated, and time may also matter. The more planning needed to create a museum often leads to consideration decades after other memory projects, so it's not captured within our research. So after this, we turned to the part of the analysis that was a little bit more intimidating, Stata. So we ran a lot of regressions to try and figure out which correlations existed between the different memory components and implementation probability. And we had a lot of interesting results, one being strong support showing that recommendations which memorialize individuals are negatively associated with project initiation and implementation level. So why is this the case? Well, we can't say for certain, but we think that individuals who, because they're remembered in a post-violence context, may be divisive and recognizable enough to cause intensified controversy. And we've seen this in recent times. Memorials of individuals are often the ones that receive the most public attention, such as this one of Christopher Columbus in Guatemala, which the public tried to take down. So why is this research important? Well, our project is the first systematic global study of memorialization in post-violence societies. And by breaking up memorialization into its components, we're able to better understand which decisions commissions and policymakers make. And there's also lots of connections to the US, which is obviously debated in recent years about how to deal with memorialization of our past. So for example, this statue of Robert E. Lee was removed from Richmond's Monument Avenue following intense protests and was moved to the Black History Museum, Cultural Center, Virginia this year, which is right over here. So that's a super interesting example. There's like tons of examples just in Virginia alone, let alone the entire US.
But yeah, to give a little insight into our timeline on this project, we've wrapped up the paper. We're currently working on presenting it at different conferences. As Alex said, we're going to present it at APSA in a few months. And we are incorporating the comments that we've been getting from academics, and we'll hopefully be submitting it to journals soon. So yeah, that's it for us. And thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you. And Alexandra, thank you for chiming in from the very early hours in Mongolia. All right, Peter.
Hi, everyone. Let me just zoom in here. All right, my name is Peter. I'm a rising sophomore on the Data Listening to Leaders team. I'm a research assistant for the team, so I specialize in gathering contacts. And recently I've been contributing to a literature review. And I've been in charge in some of the email responses that we've been doing on the team to respond to officials from other countries that have questions about the surveys we send out. And the surveys are offered in a lot of languages. We have English, Portuguese, and a lot more. So what is the role of listening to leaders? Well, we specialize in 360-degree feedback surveys, as we like to call them. And we question things like development and what are leaders, how are leaders responding to development needs around the world? And is there some sort of similarity or discrepancy in how constituents feel about these issues? So this year, we actually sent out a survey to question leaders about the developments in China overseas and the Belt Road Initiative. So a lot of our contacts, as you can see here, are comprised of a lot of stakeholder groups. So it can range from the executive branch and governments, parliamentarians, local representatives, NGO and CSO leaders, which we've been doing a lot of. And those are just some of the highest percentages of contacts we've been reaching out to. And on the left here, we have, in the dark green, we have contacts in just regions that we've been surveying in 2014 and 2017. And the light green are some of the newer regions that we've been sending surveys out to as of 2020. And we will be continuing to expand. And a lot of these regions are low or middle income countries, or LMICs, as I like to say. And we ask them about these surveys and send it out to them. And something that I really like about this team is that the survey shifts in focus yearly, and that's really special because we're getting a broad range of issues to talk about here, while plotting out some really good statistics, which I can show you in the next slide. So here is just an example from the recent policy report that got published on our website. And here it just shows you the discrepancies between leaders and countries on specific issues. Just to name some: poverty, clean water, gender equality, climate. So those are some of the things that are ranked higher by citizens in the country. And then you can see on the line, those are ranked very similarly by leaders and their constituents in some of these regions we've been surveying. And in the blue, we have issues that are ranked higher by leaders. So that's inequality, industry, peace and justice, employment, and education, just to name some. And this was from our 2020 Listening to Leaders survey. So some of the work I've been doing is, like I mentioned, the literature review. There's been an increasingly alarming topic that is currently being researched in our literature review, and that's debt transparency. Around 58% of debt is reported within these selected LMICs, and many of them are turning to the PRC for loans for developmental practices, making transparency very difficult to enforce in these regions, since very little is known about these loans in international institutions. So that can range from like paperwork or leaders refusing to file certain reports about their national debt. And something that I've found here is from USAID. This is just a little graphic here to show which countries are being the most transparent about their debt and reporting accurate figures every year. And I've researched this extensively, and we've seen a lot of work with aid data and USAID and a lot of other agencies intersecting, and it's been really great to see our collaboration with a lot of these prominent agencies in the government. So USAID's Fiscal Accountability and Sustainable Trade Project is one of these things that I've been researching, and they've actually created a new survey called the DTS, and it's the Debt Transparency Scoreboard, and it pretty much ranks these countries based on how transparent they're being with reporting accurate figures in their data. And this is a really important statistic that I've been researching. And then I've really liked this topic actually because it relates to a memo I wrote actually in my freshman year about civil military fusion used by the People's Republic of China. And essentially that's about financing from public sectors in other countries. And that's been interesting because a lot of that goes under the radar, and it's not really detected by countries that are being subject to it. So, and that's being used to finance military arms and things like that. So, making sure to make these things even more clearer today, and just to shed some light on the practices used by governments around the world through different ways of financing, and how these things are sort of out of the norm for a lot of international institutions, like these new crediting practices that are being used by a lot of countries. So that's just one of the topics that I've been researching. And next we have disinformation, which is another topic that we are researching for a potential survey in the future. But so here we have the South Caucus, which is comprised of a lot of regions here. We have Georgia, Armenia, and more. So European countries continue to question the efficiency of the EU's, common foreign and security policy to manage outside threats to the South Caucus. So the South Caucus has yet to achieve full control over a lot of media sources in their country since the fall of the Soviet Union. So particularly Georgia. I know this was talked about before, and I appreciate the person who was talking about that. So Georgia is actually very subject to Kremlin influence in social media, and there's been a very noticeable trend in this. And just in the South Caucasus region, there's been a lot of formation in a lot of extremist groups and a lot of disinformation campaigns in neighboring countries with a pro-separatist minority. So I hope with this research, I'll be able to help uncover unregulated disinformation campaigns by the Kremlin and some rebel groups in these regions and beyond. And so it's also important to look at this topic because there's an importance in making a distinction between disinformation stories, campaigns, and operations. So that's something that I've been looking at into detail as well. All right, and so for next semester, we plan on navigating towards an internal website for contact collection, just for more ease for a lot of our research assistants. And we plan on doing that soon. But as for now, currently our live survey on the Belt Road Initiative is being surveyed to the contacts we have out there. And we hope to prepare more surveys in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, next up we have Jacob.
All right. Hello, everybody. I think I have to, there we go. Let's see if the screen share will work. All right. Zoom has been misbehaving recently, so if you can't see anything, please just cut me off. I will work it out. So my name's Jacob. I've been working at AidData, and I'm helping build out a project where we're developing a machine learning workflow to estimate wealth distribution across areas where we don't have very much ground truth data. So in this presentation, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what the goals of this project are, and give you a broad overview of what the different pieces of this project look like, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the work that I've specifically been doing over the summer. So the goals of this project is, of course, to develop this machine learning workflow to estimate poverty distribution around different regions of the world. But specifically, we want it to be a really accessible workflow to researchers who might not have a ton of computational resources. So the idea is that we have this system that they can run with our like pre-validated input data, or they can go in and use their own data to create models without too much trouble. So then we're sort of creating this workflow that helps people then export those models and use them in the future to estimate poverty in areas where we don't have a whole lot of data. Yeah, so here's the overview of our project. So the idea is that you first choose a region of study, and then you take a few different data sources here. So we have OpenStreetMap data, which is basically like Google Maps, but sort of like Wikipedia, where anyone can add information to it. So it's a really nice global data set. We have a few other worldwide data sets from GeoQuery that we're using. And then we have this ground truth data from the DHS program, which is funded by USAID. And that's the data that we're comparing against to make sure that things are accurate enough, that we're providing good estimations. So then we're developing a machine learning model using a decision forest. And then we're taking that model and we're providing it data from other parts of the world where we don't have very good ground truth data to see if we can get good enough estimates to help people with development projects. So my part of this project is integrating something called MLflow, which is this program that will help track the different parameters that we're putting into these machine learning models, and basically figure out what parameters are having the best impact. They have the most feature importance. And then MLflow will also help us manage these machine learning models and export them for the future use. So the idea is that it's one place. It's kind of like this little dashboard web app that you can log into, and you can look at the different models that we've created and quickly figure out which one's working best for your needs, and track how well they've been running as you like modify the different parameters of inputs that you put in there. So yeah, I'd like to quickly thank the researchers that I've been working with here, Dr. Goodman, Eli, and Sasan. And just want to shout out OpenStreetMap and the DHS program for providing all the data that we've been using. So please feel free to get in touch with me if you'd like to talk more about this project. Thanks.
Thank you, Jacob. And then last but certainly not least, we have Zoe and Melissa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa McCuna, and I'm here with Zoe Roberts, and we are two student researchers working as GRI Summer Fellows, and we are working with the Africa Research Center. For our summer project, we went to Liberia and Morocco this summer to study lead EDU soccer academies in both of the countries. In recent years, NGOs and international aid organizations have begun to express interest in sport for development as a strategy to explore new avenues for youth development. However, the number of studies exploring this link has been limited. Our work with the African Research Center aims to fill this gap by implementing an impact evaluation of two schools, Monrovia Football Academy and Lead Morocco, run by the organization Lead EDU. These schools incorporate sports and life skills lessons to promote academic and leadership skills among their students.
Yeah, so like Melissa said, this summer we're working in both Liberia and Morocco to run a series of football festivals where we administer assessments to evaluate educational and pro-social outcomes among Liberian and Moroccan students. When applying to Leeds academies, students go through a rigorous application process consisting of scouting, testing, and family interviews. And by the end of this process, the remaining students are invited to a camp where they attend a couple of days of classes on their academic and athletic skills. At this point in the process, almost all of the students are very high performers and top candidates, and many of the final decisions come down to an almost arbitrary decision whether or not to accept a student. And those students who make it to the final stages of Leeds application process but don't end up receiving admission usually end up enrolled in the public school system. So because of this process, Leeds recruitment generates a quasi-experimental comparison where we can assess the cognitive and non-cognitive skills among those who attend Lead and those who are what we call just missed the cut. So in Liberia, in addition to these two groups of students, we have also invited and tested a third group from one of Monrovia's most prestigious private schools, BW Harris. And the addition of this group allows us to more specifically target the effect of integrating sports into the educational experience, since BW Harris is more academically rigorous and well-resourced than Liberian public schools, which means it provides a closer comparison to the Monrovia Football Academy. Over the past month, we developed academic exams for grades 3 to 12 in partnership with the Liberian Ministry of Education, and we also designed non-cognitive surveys. Based on the pre-existing literature on pro-social development, we created these surveys to evaluate students' grit, growth mindset, self-control, leadership skills, and views on ethnicity and gender. We also included a school survey to assess the students' perceptions of their schools and their teachers, as well as an asset index, which will allow us to disaggregate data based on economic background.
While preparing our testing materials, we also collated student registries and traced over 300 students to invite them to 5 days of football festivities, which we planned and implemented alongside a local research organization, the Center for Action, Research, and Training. During these festivals, students participated in non-cognitive surveys, academic testing, as well as football matches and other games. Currently, we are setting the groundwork to replicate our Liberian study in Morocco in September. Once we obtain the results from both of these studies, we will analyze the data to determine how the 3 groups of students, MFA, Monrovia Football Academy, JMC, and BW Harris, perform across the different categories. While MFA provides a bundle treatment, not just the integration of sports into the curriculum, we do hope that our study will provide valuable insight into the efficacy of sport board development.
Great. Okay, thank you to all of our wonderful presenters. We don't have very much time left, but I am going to pass it over to the director of GRI, Mike Tierney, to act as a quick moderator.
Thanks, Cassie. Yeah, I see 6 minutes until we all turn into pumpkins. So first question to the last group, where are you guys right now, Zoe and Melissa?
Yeah. Hi, we are currently in Morocco. We are working to adapt our Liberia work into the Moroccan context. However, while in Liberia, we got to attend one of the festivals last week, which was really nice. We won't be able to attend them in Morocco, so we're doing a lot of like preliminary work before the festivals occur here. And then greatest challenges that we faced this summer in the field. I know for me, a good amount of it was just adjusting to working abroad in a new environment. Most of my time outside of the US has been for like 5 days at most. And then I was in Liberia for a month, and then Morocco will be here for 2 weeks. And so on one hand, that came with unique challenges like homesickness, but also figuring out how to orient myself. It also came with a lot of fun surprises and meeting new people. And then another challenge was the programming. It took us a while to make sure the programming of the surveys was up and ready for the festival days, which I know caused me personally at least quite a bit of stress, but we got that worked out really well right beforehand, and it all went smoothly, which was really nice.
Right. Oh, that's really great. Thank you so much. We have Mongolia and Morocco represented. It's pretty impressive. I really appreciate everyone coming out today. This is one of my favorite events. We do this 3 times a year, the summer, the spring, and the fall. And the event was originally created because of student demand. Students were working in the summer and they were, busily beavering away on whatever they were working on. And they wanted to know what were other people doing at GRI, and frankly, what were the other opportunities for students to go to Liberia or Morocco, rather than sitting in the basement of Blow Hall with me and coding journal articles or whatever it was. So I'm just sad that we can't be together in person today. Normally, we take the conversation out onto the front porch, we eat pizza, and people can ask follow-up questions. But we now have 4 minutes for follow-up questions. So I'm just going to let whoever would like to ask a question to anyone else to raise their Zoom hand, and then you will have the floor. I would just ask that you introduce yourself before you ask your question. First come, first serve, folks. Or else Professor Tierney will just start doing cold calls. Zoe knows that I'll do this. She took intro hour with me. Dean, do you have a question? I see you just unmuted.
No, I don't. I just wanted to show my face a little bit. Sorry.
You look great. You look fantastic. Well, if nobody has a substantive question, then Dean, please tell us the story. How in the heck did you end up at a Tunisian wedding?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll tell that. So the second day, me and Ian were just started chatting with our translator. And then we ended up, our translator cohort were brothers. So then we ended up having him later in the day. And then we became close friends. He drove us home and he just told us he was like, gonna have a wedding. And then I was sort of like a foolish, like, oh my God, we're there. And he was like, classic Tunisian style. He was like, Ian, have you ever been to a Tunisian wedding before? And then Ian was like, no. So I'm Tunisian. So I was like, Ian, we have to go. So then like 3 days later, we decided to go. And then just to put it in perspective, like at one point, Ian was being thrown in the air by like some of the family members. And then I had the groom on my shoulders. We were dancing. We're in like all the family photos. It didn't make any sense. It was in like
a wedding photographer.
It was really fun.
I don't know if we can get the wedding photos, but I have videos of what he just described. So me in the air, and then he's like chicken fighting with the groom. It was, I don't know, it was a lot of fun. We also used that opportunity to network with like recently dismissed government officials. So like it was really productive, actually.
Yeah, who was on house arrest. And that was a very interesting interview that we had to do, which was fun because of the wedding, I guess. Yeah.
That sounds great. All right, everybody, last chance for a question for any of our presenters.
Mike, there's a raised hand. I don't know if you
I'm sorry. I guess I can't see it. There it is. Is that Soraya?
Yes.
Fire away.
This question is for Bill and Alexandra. I didn't catch if you mentioned how far back were you looking when you were examining truth and reconciliation commissions? Like what was the time frame that you were looking at?
Sorry, the classic, forgot to unmute myself. But we were looking at the entire body of truth commissions that we have, which I think is from, if I'm not mistaken, sometime in the 1970s up until I think our data stops at like 2017 or 2018. So yeah, it's basically the entire body of truth commissions up until when we stopped doing research, which was like a few years ago.
Awesome. Where did you say that this will be published? I'd love to follow up and read more about this.
Yeah, well, we're currently in the process of getting it ready to apply and for journals, and so we'll see. I don't know like how it's gonna go, but yeah, you can definitely keep up with us probably on social media. Like the International Justice Lab has the Twitter and other social media, but then you can also email us. Like I can put my email in the chat, and I'd love to keep you updated with our progress. And yeah, like I said, we're going to be presenting it at the at APSA in September. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I can definitely keep.
Yeah, that would